with me, Emily Webb, on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein's charged with rape and sexual abuse. A New York court releases him on $1 million bail with an order that he's electronically monitored. The relationship between North Korea and the US has certainly been explosive lately. Now that summit, which was off, may be back on. And he gained international fame at the royal wedding. Now Bishop Curry's bringing his message of social justice here to Washington.
I love my president and I pray for him just as much as I love the people and the poor and immigrants and others for whom I advocate.
Welcome to our viewers on public television in America and around the world. The disgraced Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein's been charged with rape and sexual abuse. This morning he turned himself in and appeared before a New York court. Once the most powerful man in his industry, today the only deal he was making was his bail arrangement, which came to $1 million cash and includes wearing an electronic tag. The charges relate to 2 women, but dozens have made allegations against him. Mr. Weinstein's lawyer says his client denies the criminal charges. From New York, Nick Bryant reports.
New York City can often feel like a giant movie set, but this was the criminal justice system being put into action for real. And as Harvey Weinstein arrived to be charged, I managed to confront him.
This must be very humiliating, Mr. Weinstein. Mr. Weinstein, this must be very humiliating for you.
He walked into the police station with 3 large books under his arm, one about Broadway musicals. But what mattered today were the words on his charge sheet, accusing him of 2 counts of rape and 1 count of a criminal sexual act for incidents involving 2 separate women. Inside the police station, he was arrested, fingerprinted and formally booked. Then, about an hour later, he was brought out, flanked by 2 detectives, wearing handcuffs and what looked like a wry smile.
Harvey Weinstein is now being taken to a criminal court, and this is a day his accusers long to see.
His demeanor had noticeably changed by the time he was led into court. The movie mogul who once loved parading on the red carpet, forced to take what the Americans call a perp walk. He looked numb during the short arraignment hearing as prosecutors outlined their case.
This defendant used his position, money, and power to lure young women into situations where he was able to violate them sexually.
His lawyer claimed his client was innocent and said he couldn't be prosecuted for bad behavior, just for criminal behavior.
Mr. Weinstein did not invent the casting couch in Hollywood, and to the extent that there is bad behavior in that industry, that is not what this is about. Bad behavior is not on trial in this case. It's only if you intentionally committed a criminal act, and Mr. Weinstein vigorously denies that.
As news of his arrest and charges came out, the reaction on social media was swift and celebratory, from some of those who've accused him of wrongdoing and others who worked hard to see him in court today.
To see him in cuffs on the way out, whether he smiled or not, that's a very good feeling.
The actress Rose McGowan has accused him of raping her.
This is a big strike into the heart of abuse of power, and this shows people worldwide, which is what I was hoping the whole time, that this cannot and will not stand.
Harvey Weinstein not only used to dominate an industry, he commanded almost every room. But to watch him today was to see his power drain away. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Well, for more on the legal angles of this case, I spoke a brief time ago with Wendy Murphy, a professor of sexual violence law. Wendy, thanks for coming on the programme. What's the case that prosecutors will have to prove in this?
Well, he's currently charged with 3 different felonies, a first-degree rape, a third-degree rape, and then a sexual abuse charge. But they're all felonies, and he faces up to 25 years if convicted. In a sense, they all require somewhat the same kind of evidence, that the behavior was without the consent of the victim, that it was done forcibly, and that there was some kind of sexual contact. The more serious charges require penetration. And we don't know very much about one of the victims. The charges involve two different women. One of the women, Lucia Evans, has spoken publicly, and she has acknowledged that one of the cases involves what happened to her. We don't know much about the other victim. Officials have described her as someone who has not yet spoken publicly. So that's very interesting. Those appear to be the more serious charges of rape. And again, rape, when we're talking about rape under New York law, this is not, you know, an unfriendly sexual encounter with people who might have had a misunderstanding. This is forcible penetration. And under New York law, the definition of force is very serious. There has to be almost a physical, aggressive act, a threatened act of violence. Force is a very difficult element to prove. We don't know the details of the evidence involving the woman who has not yet spoken publicly. But suffice it to say, if he's been charged, then law enforcement officials believe they can prove that he acted with force. And we do know with regard to Lucia Evans that the force alleged in that case is that he grabbed her head and forced her to submit to penetration, oral penetration. And that act alone, the grabbing of her head and forcing her onto his body, that is enough to prove a forcible felony sex crime in New York.
And if this does make it to trial, could we see, like we did with the Cosby case, other women coming forward to testify?
Absolutely. The answer to the question how many of the 80 or so victims of Harvey Weinstein might be allowed to take the stand is anyone's guess at this point. A judge has tremendous discretion. For sure, the kinds of cases that would be allowed to be admitted for that kind of testimony to show that he had a pattern of a certain type of behavior would have to be similar enough to the allegations here. It couldn't just be any woman who said he sexually assaulted her. The facts would have to line up pretty closely to what we see here. And he does have a pretty strange pattern. For Bill Cosby, it was a strange pattern of drugging women, knocking them unconscious, and then raping them. For Harvey Weinstein, his pattern that I would describe as strange enough to admit some of those other women's testimonies is that he lured them with false claims about, you come to my office and I'm going to help you get a job in Hollywood. He did that a lot. And if I were the judge in this case, I'd let those kinds of women testify to their stories to show that this was not a guy who was on a bad date with women who found him boorish. This is a guy who was predatory, who was using his power to hunt down women that he could take advantage of by offering them jobs and then using his power over their careers to force them to submit to his sexual demands.
Very briefly, Wendy, if I may ask you, how key is today in the whole Me Too movement?
Boy, this is a great day in the Me Too movement, and it's just a great day overall for women in this country. Women are not yet constitutionally equal under the Constitution in America, and that, I think, in a large sense, participates in causing high rates of sexual violence against women in this country. So it's a wonderful day because the guys who get away with sexual violence against women tend to be the powerful, wealthy guys just like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. We have a new message today in this country that they're not getting away with it anymore.
Wendy Murphy, thanks for joining us. Well, yesterday it was off, and now the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un could be back on, but nothing's for certain. Mr. Trump indicated the meeting could be salvaged after a conciliatory statement from North Korea saying it remained open to talks. But for anyone following these negotiations, the whiplash of developments is certainly keeping everyone guessing and travel agents quite busy. Well, the BBC's North America editor John Sopel sent us this report.
As the North Koreans set charges to their only known nuclear test site, it seemed that all hopes of a summit went up in smoke at about the same time that these buildings were blasted to smithereens. The explosions taking place just as Donald Trump was pulling the plug on his planned meeting with Kim Jong-un, citing North Korea's tremendous anger and open hostility. and that in turn provoked some fairly open hostility towards the US president in South Korea. But that was a whole 24 hours ago, and a lot can change in that time. Overnight, the North Koreans issued a conciliatory statement saying the unilateral announcement to cancel the summit is unexpected, and we cannot but feel great regret for it. We have the intent to sit with the US side to solve problems, regardless, at any time. And that was music to Donald Trump's ears. You remember the summit that was off? Well, it might now just be back on.
We'll see what happens. It could even be the 12th. We're talking to them now. They very much want to do it. We'd like to do it. We're going to see what happens.
At the Pentagon, the Defense Secretary, far from rattling sabres, was talking up the possibility too.
Got some possibly some good news on the Korea summit, where it may, if our diplomats can pull it off, may have it back on even.
Today, Kim Jong-un was striking an unusually relaxed pose in pictures released by the North Korean news agency. A floppy hat, a white jacket, looking to all the world as though he was quite enjoying himself. And Donald Trump, who loves a drama too, might be enjoying it as well. But for all that the atmospherics might have improved, substantial policy differences remain. A spokesman insisting that North Korea must commit to the quick denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Who'd bet on how this is going to turn out? John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, a brief time ago, I discussed the prospect of any future summit with former US Ambassador to the UN, Bill Richardson, who's been on multiple diplomatic missions to North Korea. Governor Richardson, thanks very much for coming in. 1 minute the summit is off. Now we're getting indications that it could be back on. As someone who has extensive experience of dealing with North Korea, where do you see things?
Well, first of all, there's the Trump roller coaster foreign policy. And then North Koreans, they want this summit badly. And they know that they may have overplayed their hand with their rhetoric, with their insults. But that's how they operate. I think the summit will happen. I don't think it'll be June 12th, but shortly thereafter. But I think the positive lining is that both sides will now assess the reality of what the summit might bring. The U.S. has had too many high expectations about denuclearization, and the North Koreans know that they're going to have to do something substantial. So maybe it's good that this pause has happened, because I don't think either side was prepared, especially the United States.
You talk about both sides having a different idea of what denuclearization actually means. I mean, how much could this continue to be a sticking point?
Well, it's going to continue to be a sticking point. There has to be a compromise. The North Koreans think denuclearization means freezing their nuclear capabilities, their missiles, curbing their use. The United States says, you have to destroy all your nuclear weapons. Well, the North Koreans may have as many as 60. They're not going to destroy them. But some compromise in between may be possible on denuclearization, on missiles, on conventional weapons that look to South Korea. But certainly a summit could substantially reduce tensions. And that's what we want, because the peninsula has been fraught with enormous danger and national security problems.
And Governor, the reason why President Trump wrote that letter yesterday, he called it off, and now saying that a conciliatory statement could actually put things back on. But many will wonder, is that enough to get things back on track and address some of the underlying issues why the president wrote that letter?
Well, you have to look at the politics besides the national security issue. Both leaders need the summit. Kim Jong-un needs it. Whenever I negotiated with him, the ultimate goal was a negotiation with the President of the United States. President Trump, because of his domestic problems, because this could be a far-reaching agreement, the most important that he has, needs a summit too. But both are very unpredictable. Both leaders are impulsive. They shoot from the hip. They're not traditional diplomats. So I think the summit, being in the best interest of both countries, will happen, but under different circumstances with different goals, more realistic goals, which I think is good, because had they met June 12th with unrealistic objectives, the summit could have been a disaster for both countries.
And Governor, you obviously are one of the few people who can say that they've negotiated with North Korea. Do you think that the current administration is going about this in the right manner?
No, I believe the president deserves credit for agreeing to meet with Kim Jong-un. But no, I think the administration is speaking with too many voices. You've got John Bolton, the national security advisor, saying the Libya model, where Gaddafi ended up dead. If I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm going to be very nervous with that. Then you've got Pompeo, who I think is on the right track, who's met with Kim Jong-un. He's a State Department diplomat, diplomacy. So the administration needs to speak with one voice, and it should be Pompeo, not the vice president, the national security, or the president. You know, the president, you never know what he's going to tweet early in the morning. So that's one thing. And then secondly, forget complete denuclearization. The North Koreans aren't going to do it. But it's worthy of a summit to meet to discuss curbing missile use, curbing nuclear use, conventional weapons, human rights. There are a lot of good things that can happen. The situation in the peninsula couldn't be worse. So I think from the top to the bottom is the best way to negotiate, because in the past, negotiating from the bottom to the top hasn't worked. Under Bush, under Clinton, under Obama. Maybe it'll work under President Trump, but he sure makes things very difficult and exciting and unpredictable.
It's certainly difficult and exciting. Governor Richardson, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now let's take a look at some of the day's other news. The governments of the Netherlands and Australia have formally accused Russia of being behind the shooting down of flight MH17 over Ukraine 4 years ago. The Kremlin says there's no evidence of Russian involvement. Brazil's President Michel Temer says that he plans to send in the army to clear roads that have been blocked for 5 days by lorry drivers protesting high fuel prices. Diesel prices have nearly doubled in Brazil since 2016. Because of the protests, many shops are running low on basic goods, and airports are said to be closed to running out of fuel. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. A week ago, he was getting ready for the royal wedding. Now it's Washington, not Windsor, where Bishop Michael Curry is making his voice heard. The French Army's been marking the 100th anniversary of Britain's Royal Air Force with a ceremony in Paris today. It's to celebrate close cooperation between the two countries when they fought alongside each other against Germany in the First World War. And a team of aircraft enthusiasts from the United Kingdom has been rebuilding 2 original planes from the period. Our correspondent in Paris, Hugh Schofield, was at the Invalides military site for the big occasion and sent this report.
An Avro 504 from the Yorkshire Air Museum. They've been putting it back together in the courtyard of the French Army Museum in the Invalides, along with a French plane, a SPAD 7. The Avro was one of the planes flown by British pilots over France in World War I, and here they're celebrating not just the 100 years of the RAF, but also 100 years of cooperation in air warfare between the UK and France.
The familiar insignia of the Royal Air Force, instantly reminiscent, of course, of the French national flag. And why is it like that? Because in the First World War, the planes of the new RAF had to be easily identifiable by their French allies.
It was in France that the RAF was in effect created. By 1918, there were 50 British squadrons here with a headquarters at Saint-Omer near Calais. The first planes were only for reconnaissance, but then some took up machine guns to take potshots at the Germans. They responded and air warfare had begun. Back then, of course, flying, let alone fighting in the air, was still very much in its infancy. Today there's to be a ceremony and a flypast here to mark the centenary. Bands from the two countries have been rehearsing. 100 years on, the two air forces continue to work closely together despite Brexit. Today, it's supersonic jets and cruise missiles against jihadis. Air warfare has indeed come a long way since the Avro 504. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Well, the polls have just closed in Ireland's abortion referendum. People have been asked if they want to keep or overturn the country's constitutional ban on abortion. Reports suggest turnout's been high, with thousands of people flying home from around the world to cast their vote, as our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy reports.
An emotional day for Ireland. For some, casting one vote was worth travelling many miles for.
I've come from Amsterdam. I've come home because I think it's very important for Irish women. Hopefully it'll be a historic day and that we'll vote yes, and finally Irish women will have the right to autonomy over their bodies.
It's been really horrible to watch from away and not be able to do much except for tweeting and Facebooking that I really wanted to come home and cast my vote.
A yes vote in this referendum would pave the way to legalise abortions up to the 12th week of pregnancy.
I work in Brussels and I'm coming home to vote no. I believe this legislation is far too extreme. I believe killing for convenience is terrible.
Ireland's traditional Catholic roots have led to the country retaining some of the strictest abortion laws in the world. What's known as the 8th Amendment of the country's constitution gives an equal right to life for a mother and the unborn. But Leo Varadkar, the country's first openly gay Prime Minister, has been leading the call for change.
I always get a little buzz from voting. It just feels like it's democracy in action. Not taking anything for granted, of course, but quietly confident. There's been a good turnout so far.
Polling stations have been recording high turnouts all day, a reflection of the strength of feeling on this issue in Ireland and a result of the vociferous campaigns that have been fought in every part of the country. How big a day is this for Ireland?
I think it's a massive day, especially for all generations, and for young people to have their say as well. It's really important, and you know, it's us that will be affected as well.
This referendum is the culmination of an intense debate over one of Ireland's most emotive issues. Its result will be a measure of the country's social and political change.
Well, this time last week we were preparing for the royal wedding, and back then few knew of Bishop Michael Curry. What a difference a sermon can make. He's become one of the stars of the ceremony and since then has been riding a media high. Last night he brought his message of social justice here to Washington DC, and I got to meet him. He's the man of the moment after last week's royal wedding, but now Bishop Curry is back on American soil. As you can see, there's a huge crowd who come to see him.
Oh, love your neighbor. That's why we're here. Love your neighbor. Love the neighbor you like and the neighbor you don't like. Love your Democrat neighbor, your Republican neighbor, your black neighbor, your white neighbor, your Anglo neighbor, your Latino, your LGBTQ neighbor. Love your neighbor. That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
What was it like to see Bishop Curry up close?
It was really surreal.
Yes.
And it made it feel like the church is global. That even though he was preaching to royals less than a week ago, he's now here in the American Capitol preaching to us.
It's such a shock, but such an honor to be just feet away from a man who gave such a great message about love.
After hearing what he had to say at the royal wedding, I think was a message for the entire world, not just for the couple. And then it was reiterated here in the land that thinks it's the most powerful, but happens to be the most confused.
We have, in many respects, overcome segregation in some contexts, but we have segregated ourselves now, not just along lines of race, but now along lines of politics. And so we're inviting people who are left and right wing to come together and actually get to know each other.
Bishop Curry is one of a number of faith leaders leading a candlelight procession to the White House to take their message there. Your mission statement for this event is fairly strong. You talk about America First policies as heresy. Is that a direct dig at Donald Trump?
No, no, it's not. It's a statement, a reminder, especially to Christian people, that only God is first. I love my country. We love our country, but we don't see our country as better than any other country.
Do you love your president?
I love my president and I pray for him just as much as I love the people and the poor and immigrants and others for whom I advocate.
you have a huge profile after last week. Would you consider running for office?
No. Nope. I'm a spiritual person, spiritual leader. That's my job.
Bishop Curry ending our programme. Well, remember, you can find more on all the day's news at our website